A suffocating silence hung in the bedroom of Kang Ji-hun, the most feared mafia boss in Seoul. Only his ragged, heavy breathing broke the quiet. He rolled over to the far edge of the mattress, his back turned to his mature American wife Vivian. The heavy air was thick with his unspoken shame and bitter defensive anger. Suddenly, Ji-hun flicked on the light, flooding the room with a harsh glare. He sneered, looking down at her with cold eyes. "Look at your body, Vivian. Look at your stretch marks from childbirth. Your skin is aging. Do you really expect a 29-year-old man to desire a woman of your age?" Vivian pulled the sheet over her chest. Her breath was shaky, but her gaze remained steel. "You are attacking my scars, Ji-hun, but we both know the truth. The problem tonight wasn't my body. You are just terrified to admit your own weakness. Your cruelty is just a mask for your failure." Ji-hun snapped, grabbing her wrist with crushing force. "Shut up! Your age does not give you the right to pity me." At that moment, the door burst open. Christina entered, throwing a white DNA test folder onto the bed. "She is right, Ji-hun. She found someone else. These papers prove the triplets are not yours. She is just a con artist using you." Blinded by humiliation and eager to hide his own shame, Ji-hun tore off Vivian's wedding ring and threw the folder in her face. "Get out of my sight immediately, and take your 3 children with you." Vivian stared at the heavy white folder that Christina had thrown onto the bed. The bold letters, "DNA test result," seemed to mock her in the harsh bedroom light. Christina stood by the door, her arms crossed, wearing a triumphant, ugly smirk that showed she had finally won. Ji-hun's face turned pale, but instead of looking for the truth, Vivian saw something terrifying in his eyes: relief. He was not angry about the alleged betrayal. He was grateful for it. This lie was his escape route. It was the perfect excuse to discard the mature woman who knew his deepest, most humiliating secret and witnessed his physical failure. He didn't ask for explanations. He didn't look at the paper. Ji-hun lunged forward, grabbing Vivian's left hand. With a brutal, desperate jerk, he tore the diamond wedding band off her finger, scraping her skin. The ring slipped from his trembling hand, hitting the hardwood floor with a sharp, metallic ring before rolling into the dark corner. "You used me," Ji-hun hissed, his voice cracking into a raspy, venomous whisper. "You brought your street trash into my home and tried to name it after me. Take your sick, defective babies and get out of my house. Get out of my country before I have my men throw you into the sea." Vivian did not cry. She gathered her sleeping triplets, wrapping them in a single thin blanket, and walked out. Behind her, the massive iron gates of the estate slammed shut with a deafening metallic bang, locking her in the freezing rain. The transition from a life of absolute luxury to the cold reality of the slums was silent and brutal. Vivian stood in a tiny, damp room in Itaewon, staring at her reflection in a cracked mirror. Her long, beautiful hair, which Ji-hun had once wrapped around his fingers in the dark, now felt like a heavy weight of useless memories. She picked up a pair of cheap scissors. With a steady hand, she cut. Lock after lock of dark hair fell, leaving her completely bare, raw, and ready to fight. She sold her hair to a local wig maker for a handful of copper coins, just enough to buy 2 cans of baby formula. To survive, Vivian took the only job that didn't ask for papers: or a resume. She started working 12-hour night shifts at a hazardous chemical packaging plant on the outskirts of Seoul. The air inside the facility was thick with toxic dust and the sharp, burning smell of raw reagents. By the end of every shift, her throat felt like sand, and her hands were covered in painful chemical burns. It was a cruel twist of fate for a former research chemist to pack the toxins she once analyzed. She hid her swollen red hands in cheap cotton gloves and covered her face with a heavy black mask, not just to breathe, but to hide from the world. Every night, after washing the bitter white dust from her skin, she would lie in her freezing bed, listening to the shallow breathing of her babies. She kept her back straight, refusing to let anyone see her struggle. She even sold her own blood at a back alley clinic when the factory wages weren't enough. That was when the real torment began. It was not the physical exhaustion that broke her spirit, but the crushing weight of her own thoughts. She would stare at the ceiling, her mind violently replaying Ji-hun's cruel words about her stretch marks and her mature, changing body. The ultimate humiliation was that, despite the freezing rain and the chemical burns, a desperate, forbidden part of her still physically craved the touch of the young husband who had discarded her like trash. She felt betrayed by her own heart, trapped in a cycle of longing. In the deep, freezing silence of the Seoul midnight, Vivian sat on the edge of her makeshift bed, listening to the soft, rhythmic breathing of her babies. The room was tiny, heated only by a single rusted pipe from the city's subways that ran along the damp floor. The air smelled of cheap laundry soap and the metallic tang of chemical dust she couldn't wash out of her skin. A single naked yellow bulb hung from the cracked ceiling, casting harsh shadows across the cold room. Vivian stood up slowly, her muscles aching from the long hours at the packaging factory. She walked over to the small stained mirror hanging on the cracked wall. With trembling fingers, she unbuttoned her coarse work shirt. Her chest tightened as she looked at her reflection. She traced the long, silver stretch marks on her abdomen and the jagged red scar from her emergency C-section. Then she looked at her hands, once soft and elegant, now rough, peeling, and marked with dark chemical burns from the toxic reagents. Ji-hun's cruel, mocking voice echoed in the silence of her mind, as loud as if he were standing right behind her. Look at your body, Vivian. Look at your stretch marks. Who could ever want you? The words felt like physical blows, tearing open the wounds in her self-esteem. She was 41. She was a mother. She had given him his legacy, and in return, he had made her feel like damaged goods, a piece of worn-out machinery to be discarded for a newer model. For the first time since that terrible night, she let the tears fall, her shoulders shaking in the dark. She wept for the body she had lost, the youth she had traded for motherhood, and the brutal unfairness of a society that praised a man's maturity but condemned a woman's aging. But the deepest, most humiliating pain was the hunger. As she sat there in the damp dark, she realized she still physically craved his touch. She hated her own skin for remembering the warmth of his hands, for longing for the very man who had shattered her dignity. She squeezed her eyes shut, fighting the bitter, suffocating shame of her own desires, refusing to let his ghost completely break her spirit. She was cast down, but she was definitely not destroyed. But the slums of Seoul did not offer Vivian a true escape from the reach of the syndicate. Ji-hun did not let her go. Instead, he chose to build an invisible, suffocating cage around her everyday life. It started with the heavy black SUVs that parked at the corner of her narrow street, their dark windows hiding the cold eyes that watched her every single move. Every time Vivian left her tiny room to buy milk, she felt those silent gazes burning into her back. He had banished her from his bed and his home, yet his shadow stubbornly refused to release her. He wanted her to suffer, but only under his strict, silent supervision. The invisible chains tightened when Vivian tried to climb out of her misery. She applied for a better research job at a local laboratory, hoping to use her chemistry degree to secure a stable, safe future for her daughters. She easily passed the initial interviews, but the very next morning, the offer was mysteriously withdrawn. The manager looked at her with pure fear in his eyes, whispering that some powerful people were simply too dangerous to employ. Ji-hun had used his massive pharmaceutical empire to blacklist her from every reputable company in the city. He was systematically cutting off her oxygen, forcing her to stay trapped in the toxic air of the chemical packaging factory. It did not stop there. The few times a kind male co-worker tried to walk her home or help her carry heavy cargo boxes, those black cars would idle nearby, their headlights blinding. By the next day, those men would look away when they passed her, suddenly terrified to even acknowledge her presence. Ji-hun was isolating her completely, ensuring she remained entirely alone in her daily struggle. He was treating her like an exiled possession, something he no longer wanted to touch, but absolutely refused to let anyone else have. Standing by her cracked window, Vivian watched the gray exhaust from a black sedan rise into the freezing night. She felt the heavy, suffocating grip of his possessive nature wrapping around her throat. He had thrown her into the dirt, yet he still claimed total ownership over her life, keeping her on a tight, invisible leash that she could neither see nor break. It was a silent war of psychological torment. The freezing winter in Itaewon brought a silent, terrifying nightmare. The toxic chemical dust from the packaging plant, which Vivian had tried so hard to wash from her clothes, finally claimed its first victim. In the middle of a dark Tuesday night, her youngest daughter, Maya, woke up gasping for air, her tiny body burning with a sudden vicious fever. Vivian panicked, her heart slamming against her ribs as she listened to her baby's shallow, raspy breathing. She didn't have enough money for a private doctor, and a public hospital would ask for identification papers that Ji-hun had blocked. She was alone, trapped in a cold room with a sick child, her hands trembling as she wiped Maya's hot forehead with a damp cloth, praying for a miracle. As the fever peaked, Vivian carried her whimpering daughter closer to the cracked window, trying to catch the dim light of a street lamp outside. She gently opened the baby's small, tight fist to cool her palm with water. That was when her breath caught in her throat. Beneath the faint yellow light, a strange, beautiful transformation was taking place on Maya's skin. A brilliant silver pigmentation began to rise on her small palm, forming a perfect glowing mark of a phoenix. The silver pattern seemed to pulse with a life of its own, shining brightly through the darkness of their room. Vivian stared, her eyes wide with shock, as she traced the glowing lines with her rough, burned finger. She knew exactly what this meant. This was no ordinary birthmark. It was the rare, ancient genetic stamp of the Kang family, the Silver Phoenix. For generations, this mark appeared only on the true heirs of the founding lineage of the syndicate. It was a biological phenomenon that could never be duplicated, bought, or faked by any laboratory. Christina's elaborate paper lies and fake DNA results were instantly destroyed by a single mark on her daughter's skin. Maya was the rightful heir to the entire pharmaceutical empire. Carrying the purest blood of the founders, Vivian held her child close to her chest, her tears of panic turning into a fierce determination. She no longer felt weak, exhausted, or broken. She held the ultimate weapon, a truth that would destroy Ji-hun's fragile pride, crush his lies, and bring his entire world to its knees. The modern luxury of the VIP hospital suite was overwhelming, but to Vivian, it felt more like an expensive tomb. When Maya's fever had worsened, Ji-hun's men had finally breached her tiny slum apartment, carrying them away in a fleet of heavily armored black sedans. Vivian woke up surrounded by soft white linens, the sweet smell of expensive lavender, and the quiet hum of advanced medical equipment. Maya was resting peacefully in a state-of-the-art crib, her fever gone, her breathing steady under the care of the city's finest pediatricians. But the relief was quickly replaced by a cold, familiar dread. When Ji-hun entered the room, his expensive suit was perfectly tailored, but his dark eyes carried a desperate, pleading intensity that Vivian had never seen before. He had placed 100 silent servants outside her door, ordering them to cater to her every single whim, from designer silk clothes to gourmet meals. He was trying to drown her in wealth, to use his massive fortune to wash away the memory of the cold night he threw her into the rain. He spoke of protection and safety, begging her to return to his world where she would never have to work another day. Yet, Vivian saw right through the luxury. When she tried to step out of the room to get some fresh air, a tall, silent guard gently but firmly blocked her path. The door was locked from the outside with a heavy electronic keypad. Ji-hun did not want to protect her. He wanted to silence her. He was terrified of the Silver Phoenix mark on Maya's skin, terrified of the truth she held, and deeply ashamed of his own weakness. His grand gesture was just a gilded cage, a beautiful prison designed to lock away the witness of his physical and emotional failure. She was trapped again, but this time her proud spirit refused to remain silent in his cold, dark, and suffocating prison. The electronic lock on the luxury VIP suite was supposed to keep Vivian quiet, but they had underestimated a mother who had survived the absolute bottom of Seoul. Vivian knew that if she stayed inside Ji-hun's gilded prison, his wealth would slowly suffocate her and bury the truth about her daughters. Maya was finally stable, while her two sisters slept nearby in a compact double hospital stroller. Vivian refused to leave any of them behind. She did not wait for permission. Using the heavy metal stand from her IV drip, she smashed the electronic keypad until the lock failed. Then she wrapped Maya securely against her chest, gripped the stroller carrying the other two girls, and moved through the dark service corridors before anyone could stop her. Minutes later, all four of them disappeared into the cold Seoul rain. For the first time since her exile, Vivian was not simply running from Ji-hun. She was moving toward a confrontation he could not control. Across the city, the syndicate's global summit glittered with camera flashes, orchestral music, and crystal glasses. Christina stood on stage in a stunning white designer gown, smiling at wealthy elders and international investors as if the future already belonged to her. She was preparing to announce her official marriage to Ji-hun and secure the legacy she believed she had stolen for good. Then, the massive double doors opened and the room fell silent. Vivian entered with Maya in her arms and her other 2 daughters beside her in the stroller. She wore no silk, lace, or diamonds, only her stained chemical plant shirt, dark work pants, and heavy rubber boots, still wet from the rain. Her cropped hair was raw, her hands scarred and peeling, but her head was high. She did not look like a woman asking to be welcomed back. She looked like a woman bringing the truth into a room built on lies before the world. Vivian walked straight up the marble aisle with Maya in her arms and her other 2 daughters beside her in the stroller. Christina shouted for security to remove her, but the guards hesitated as every camera in the hall turned toward the 3 children. Vivian stopped before the chief scientific advisor of the syndicate. Without raising her voice, she pulled back Maya's blanket and opened her tiny palm beneath the chandeliers. The silver phoenix mark caught the light. The advisor froze. He knew the mark immediately, the rare hereditary sign of the Kang founding line. But this time, Vivian had more than a symbol. During the children's emergency admission to the VIP clinic, blood had been drawn from all 3 girls. Suspicious of Christina's original report, the chief advisor had ordered the samples independently rerun. The verified results were now in his possession, sealed under the clinic's own chain of custody. All 3 girls were Ji-hun's biological daughters. The original DNA report had been fabricated. Nothing about the result was ambiguous. A stunned silence spread through the hall. The advisor lowered his head before the 3 children, and one by one, the elders followed. Christina's triumph vanished. Security moved to her side as the evidence against her was formally presented. Ji-hun remained beside the microphone, pale and motionless. The children he had rejected were his daughters. Maya carried the founding family's phoenix, and Vivian, the mature woman he had humiliated and discarded, had returned holding the truth his entire empire could no longer deny. Ji-hun stepped back from the microphone, his expensive suit wrinkled, his face pale. Vivian stood before him in stained work clothes, Maya against her chest, while her other 2 daughters waited beside her. Ji-hun placed his golden family seal and the deeds to his empire on the podium. Then he lowered himself before Vivian and the cameras. "I surrender everything," he whispered. "I called controlled protection. I hid my fear behind cruelty. Please forgive me. Come home. You and all 3 girls will have everything." Vivian looked down at him, cold and steady. "You did not throw us out because of a DNA test," she said. "You used that lie because it gave you an escape. You felt weak beside a mature woman, and instead of facing your own failure, you attacked my age, my body, and the scars I earned giving birth to your daughters." She took a single cheap coin from her pocket and dropped it onto the marble. "That is the value of the pride you chose over your family. Keep the cage, Ji-hun. My daughters and I are not living in it." Vivian turned away. Maya rested against her chest as Vivian led all 3 daughters toward the exit. Together, They disappeared into the rainy Seoul night, leaving Ji-hun and his empty billions behind. This concludes The Phoenix Mark. Why do some men turn insecurity into cruelty and control? Share your thoughts in the comments, like the story, and subscribe to Seoul Midnight Lore. Until next midnight.